As we continue exploring the evolution of identity, the continual dance between psyche and environment, between individual and culture, the particle and the ecology, some meta. The first thing to be aware of is that when there is no love, and love is loving enough to care, and we're talking about adult love. There's the love of need, there's the love of lust and desire of the child and adolescent. Adult love, loving enough to care, caring enough to take time, taking enough time to see, seeing enough to understand, understanding enough to empathize, empathizing enough to attune, to respond, responding enough to succeed at facilitating the human needs of first oneself and then another, to survive, to feel secure in that survival, to experience love and belonging, to develop self-esteem, to discover one's personal talents, gifts, to develop those and bring them into the world so as to create a new resource of abundance, and then to become part of something bigger than ourselves. When there is an absence of love, the inner child, the wounded adolescent always internalizes this as shame. To be loved is to be included, is to be valued. And the child and adolescent cannot love themselves. And the adult is often nascent. It's not yet born in so many of us. Now, every system is flawed, but the child takes the flaw in every system, and because a child is self-absorbed and dependent on the outer environment, the child takes that and makes it about themselves. If something is wrong, I'm wrong. If something is bad, I'm bad. Because the child is self-absorbed, so everything has to be about the child. And this is just the way it is. Now, because I'm not an adult in various arenas, there are regressed traumas, etc., there's a part of me that feels shame. So this is the coldness of some of this pain and behavior, which when we're talking about cold, we're talking about the reptilian brain. The reptilian brain is cold. Snakes are cold-blooded. And yet the child, the adolescent, at least start off in the empathic brain. And when they're surrounded by a temperature that's too cold, their first response is to blame and shame and participate in the scapegoating, which is the concentration of a dissociative blame. Because all blame is dissociative, to say that you are a separate part of the system and you must be punished. If you understand the ecological nature of the system, the fact that for the child to be a certain way, there has to be something in the intergenerational pattern of the family system. And for the family system to be a certain way, there has to be something intergenerational and cultural. In other words, the individual is not just that way. And so if someone is to be blamed, shamed, or whipped, then everyone is to be shamed, blamed, and whipped. You can shame the parents for not giving birth to healthier children, mentally, emotionally, and physically. You can shame their grandparents for not teaching them how to do that. You can shame the scientists for not helping the parents predict the health of their children. You can shame the government for not remedying the matter. You can whip every government official. And so, if there's a true science of connection, then the individual exists in an ecology, in a probability field that guarantees that 2% of the population will be pedophilic, that X percentage of the population will commit suicide. Because if these statistics are stable year over year in a given environment, then the cult or culture, the system, is going to produce X number of people beating their spouses, shouting, getting drunk, killing. And if the culture produces X number of people getting drunk, then the culture is also producing X number of people who are going to kill other people while driving, because we're a culture that shames people for asking for help. And so if you get a person drunk and they can't think straight, but they have an instinct that they are somehow inferior in their femininity for needing help to be driven home, then in many cases the machismo that leads the person to get drunk in the first place, because it's so hard to face the message that I'm not a real valuable person because I failed at this, I failed at that, I failed at something else, is going to be there saying, you need help, you're a wuss, you're a pussy. The chauvinism that says that getting help is somehow inferior. Well, if you were drinking to erase your inferiority, and it's worth noting that drinking is not usually terribly fun. Alcohol itself is not as tasty as grape juice. And being drunk, let alone being hungover, is not usually very fun. So it's really a somewhat painful medicinal ritual in overcoming or bypassing certain very painful feelings. Now, if you're going to create a cult that shames people for saying, I'm so drunk I don't want to hit someone, I need help, who can help me? In an environment in which that person feels inferior for asking, well, then you're going to get more people saying, I can drive, because they don't want to face the inferiority of asking. But who created the inferiority of asking? Was it the person or was it the cult? If 100,000 media programs all display the inferiority of needing help, then aren't every one of those 100,000 media teams, their entire productions that are participating in causing and allowing that message, aren't they responsible for the deaths of people on the road? As much as the drunk driver who doesn't want to accept the message that has been hammered into his brain by 100,000 media outlets, that he is less of a man if he asks for help. Because asking for help is to be a pussy, is to be closer to his feminine side in a chauvinistic cult that has taught him from birth that to be valuable, he must elevate his masculine side and disown and dissociate from his feminine side. And what's the answer to that? We like to punish and scapegoat the individual because we don't like dealing with the reality, the scientific reality, that we are participants in these realities. Now, whenever we take enough time to see and then recoil or turn away rather than moving in the continual direction of understanding, empathy, attunement, and success at facilitating the human needs we all share. The message is that, well, the reality is that the person turning away is incapable of loving as an adult in that time. Now, that incapability may be an unwillingness, a lacking of paradigm to understand even why it would be important. It can come from a reenactment of the self-abandonment, because when someone takes enough time to see a part of themselves and then internalizes the disgust of their parent, of their cult, towards that self, in order to ally with the cult rather than ally with the psyche and the self, then we have a dynamic where, in order to have integrity, that person must turn away in disgust and contempt to the same parts in other people, because it doesn't make sense mathematically that 4 plus 4 equals 8 inside, but 4 plus 4 equals 200 on the outside. And so if 4 plus 4 equals contempt on the inside, then when you meet 4 and 4 on the outside, 4 plus 4 equals contempt on the outside. And in this way, we cannot treat another better than we treat ourselves. We cannot treat other that is the same, the outside that is the same, different from the same that is inside. And every child takes this on, this message that I'm not lovable, because no one is loving this part, this part, this part, this part. I'm not lovable is the natural conclusion of a self-absorbed child. So, as I go into these domains, these layers that no one has loved, because in order to love something, you need to take time. But not just take time avoiding and running away. You have to take enough time to see. And not just see, but to understand. And understand enough to empathize. And no one has done that in this domain for me. And I can take enough time to see. And I can take enough time to understand. However, as a chauvinistic male that has been shamed repeatedly and intensely for vulnerability and feelings, it's difficult for me to move from understanding to empathy rather than from understanding to dissociation. Because to be dissociated from as an infant in a state of desperate need, to be dissociated from as a child, is horrifically painful. And if it is taboo to feel that horrific pain, then the question is, if the pain goes up because your masculinity is questioned, and it's already too much pain for a child, for an adolescent to carry, the question is, who carries that pain? And in making a recording of this nature, I'm making the recording in a cult in which more than 90% of the members of the cult treat these regions in their own psyche with contempt, with disgust, with dissociation and disowning, with denial, with abandonment, with addiction. That doesn't feel good. And to expect a cult to be able to transcend its bigotry, its racism, its chauvinism, its bias against innocence as a feminine trait. Because that's what this core is innocence. Innocence is the stem cell of the psyche. It can become anything and anyone it is called upon to be. It is powerful medicine. But it is called on and asked to become these twisted, mangled shapes of dysfunction, of chauvinism, of shame, in order to satisfy the identity of the cult that is looking for conformity and the stability provided by conformity over beauty, truth, goodness, authenticity, and life. It's asking a large portion of us to die so that the cult can remain stable. There's a tremendous offering of the psyche on the altar of every cult. There's vast dimensionality and complexity in each psyche is butchered off day by day by day. And the blood and the wound is cauterized. And what's left is a stump. What's left is a small fraction of what was possible. And the child, the infant, is so desperate to belong, so desperate to be welcome, that they hack away at themselves with the same viciousness as the larger cult around them, simply to be part of the circle, to matter, to exist. And those tears are not cried in a cult. The cult sees the birth of a new cult member. But what about all that was cut away to form that stump? And can that stump be loved? It's very difficult for me to look at who I've become in this body, in this cult, and call it beautiful or good or true. One, when so few people in so few moments of my life have done so. Two, when it is far less complex and beautiful, good and true and authentic than what was adjusted and mangled to get here. And three, when certain wounds, certain pains have never received medicine within this cult, have instead been asked to pretend that they don't exist. It's very difficult to grasp that level of pain, because pain is separation from and longing for. I long for this, but this is way out there. This is seemingly impossible, and this is here. Pain is the separation from and longing for belonging, being known, adult love, complexity, grace, symmetry, beauty. And yet, we live in a world where I wake up anxious, wake up feeling some sense of inadequacy, where there's little aliveness and complexity around me, where nobody knows, let alone empathizes with, these phases of psyche. And where most of us are so numb, we don't understand the pain that we're in, and would not welcome medicine outside the cult norms that might heal that pain that we're in. We wouldn't welcome the medicine. You go up to a person who looks reserved and untrusting and lonely and ask to give medicine for those wounds. The very act of approaching is viewed as an act of betrayal to the cult, and so it is viewed with suspicion. It is a deviation from the mean, and from the reptilian brain's perspective, that's all that needs to be paid attention to. This is a little bit different than average, and so let's protest. Let's fight that dynamic. It's so painful, but it is a pain that is difficult to grieve in a cult that does not understand the stages of grief, let alone why they occur, let alone going through them with any sense of grace and freedom. Where is the place in America where one grieves with dignity? I'm not talking about wearing black clothes and walking around numb with dignity, but wailing, bargaining, protesting. Where is the place where we grieve with dignity in a circle of our peers? Not only does this place not exist, but the average American cult member would seem puzzled that this was a big deal. It's so painful to be on the other side of dissociative numbness, and to be part of the cult is in some way to participate in that. Because when I finish this video and get on the road, when I conform to the cult, all these feelings and awarenesses dissipate, and making sure that I get my point, in the intersection where it's like, now there's the merge point, I'm to speed up to get my slot, and there's an opening there and this and that, and now I'm in the cult game. It isn't very real. It's not very beautiful. It's not very meaningful. So I did all of that. I was a good cult member, and I arrived at my destination 3 minutes faster than if I was an idiot on the road. And that's what I get. A 3-minute faster time of arrival. It's something that I then do to pay the bills. There's just so much pain. And I'm pausing at this point in the meta, because if no one grieves for this child, if no one cries for this child, how will he know that he's lovable? How will he know that he matters? if no one responds to seeing him, how will the ice and the frost not set in? And I think that's really our challenge as a cult. It's our challenge as an individual. It's my challenge. How can I see this one without loving him more? And so that's really the point in this journey where I need to respond, to find that adult in me that's capable of loving the parts that have never been loved. So I will interrupt the lineal progression of ages and evolution, which is there waiting. This happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, as layer by layer the strata of archaeology is built over millions of years, because an individual is a microcosm of the entire developmental cycle of the earth. In 9 months, one goes from being a slime, from being a cell, to becoming more and more complex. One lives in the water. One goes from being in a dependent relationship in a womb. One emerges and gives birth. One walks on all fours and slowly rises up. Then one learns language after learning sound. Then one learns to think. Then one goes from sympathy to antipathy, a rebellion against the status quo. The fallen angel. We all rebel from the status quo as we move from sympathy in the garden to antipathy, to dissociating from the ecology, from the parental system. And then we must move towards adulthood, something that we as a species are exploring, that we as individuals and family systems are exploring. What comes after the fall? What comes after the separation, the dissociation? What is an adult? How do we become that? We do it all in a few decades. And then we come back here to this moment of evolution. Every human being relives the entire history of the earth in a couple of decades and brings us back to the frontier of evolution. And this question, what next? What's coming next? How can we be a participant as adults in the co-creation of an ecological, sustainable, balanced cult of well-being, a pattern, an identity of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that leads to more life, that leads to more loving.